Now, there was one company I was at, I was running software security, and every time I would walk into this dev manager's office, he would look at me and he would say, uh-oh, the police are here. And, he'd smile, but, he'd invite me in, and he was very cordial. We had a good relationship. I'd sit down at he had a community table with snacks, and, he'd offer me snacks. We'd talk about current events and sports. Eventually, we'd get to security. He'd do his best not to talk about the security topic I was there to talk about. He'd try to deflect me, move me on my way, and he really had been bitten in the past by security functions overall, that whenever they showed up, they wanted something from him, they were going to impact his delivery cycle, and ultimately, they were going to be representatives of the Department of No. They weren't going to figure out how to help him. They were just going to tell him, somebody was telling me, you've got 30,000, actually, I guess it was Tanya's opening keynote this morning, you've got 40,000 vulnerabilities in an app, go fix it, right? Absolutely impossible. No impossible advice. Being the Department of No is not the position you want to be in. So the first step on our journey today, talking about how you speak business lingo, is to pivot from the Department of No to a concept from improv called yes and. How many people have heard of that concept of yes and? Awesome. All right, I was going to actually do a little back and forth and do some improv, but luckily I think you saved us from from that effort. But really what that is it's a really interesting way to kind of intercept your approach. As a security pro, what do? We think destructively. We think about how things are going to break. So whenever anybody shows up with an idea, the first thing we think about is, this is what can go wrong, that's going to be vulnerable, here's the issue, right? The business, generally, depending what business you're in, but generally, they think constructively. They think about how you build, how you create. And so if security can figure out how to enable the build side, you're going to have a better relationship. So let's talk about that. Sometimes people can say very concerning things as security pro. So you're working with the business and they say, we're going to open up all of our S3 buckets. Now, the Department of No would say, what did you ask to do? Absolutely not, no, right? But the Department of Yes maybe says, interesting. Tell me more about what you need to achieve here. Let's figure out what we can do. So you don't start with no. You say, okay, improv concept. Yes, okay. Now, let me clarify, because I had some folks who used to work for me who did not love the first part of yes and. They felt like yes was agreement. No. It's just saying, yes, I'm hearing you. We're having a conversation. And ultimately, let's figure out how to do that securely. So somebody else shows up with a product idea. Hey, look, we're going to build the new X, right? We're not really a product company built that way, but they have a great idea that they want to launch a new social media platform. So Department of No, you say, that's never going to work. It's nothing to do with what we're doing. Can I get out of this meeting now? This is a waste of my time. Philosophy of Yes says, wow, that sounds like an exciting idea. Walk me through your thought process, let's talk. And as they go through it and you learn more and more about the solution, you're going to then figure out, okay, what kind of security conversation do we need to have, and how do they walk away feeling good about that interaction? Because each time you have one of these interactions, you're building something or you're breaking something down. Really important. Okay, the second step on that journey. So we had yes and. The next one is business acumen. So business lingo, we got corporate culture that you sit in as a security professional. What is that corporate culture like? You've all heard these, I think, before. But, it's got values and beliefs, a leadership style, the way you approach risk, the work environment. But one of the great ways to decode a culture, either as a consultant or if you're actually living in it as a new employee or as an existing employee, is when you have your company all-hands meetings. This is where they go through the biggest initiatives they have going on. You hear what their priorities are. And one of the key things here is any new players. Because any new player who shows up, particularly an executive, you have not worked with them before. They have been brought in for something they have done before and can do for the company. Oftentimes, they have perceptions of what security can be like based on their previous company. They know nothing of you, but their perceptions are colored by that. I love the documentary on Netflix. It's called Last Dance. Anybody see that? Chicago Bulls, 1990s. It's really fantastic. And each episode kind of goes through a different player on the team or stakeholder. And Phil Jackson was the coach of the team, very zen, really phenomenal leader. And this quote, when I saw it in that documentary, it just stopped me in my tracks. You're only a success for the moment you complete a successful act. So these acts have to be repeated all the time. When you have that new executive, remember that. Your successes from the last 2 years mean nothing. You have to have that first interaction, go back to yes and, understand what their philosophy is, and then rebuild that relationship. If you get a few new executives and that you don't make that go well, that can cause some challenges. Same thing then lower down in the ranks. You have a whole bunch of new development managers show up. You have to rebuild those relationships and those expectations. Okay, second step on the journey is understanding key performance indicators. So KPIs, you've heard them, security teams probably have them, but the business has them. At your all hands that I just mentioned, usually you'll go through those KPIs. They can be things like monthly logged in daily active users, and you're checking that. It could be content engagement rate, patient satisfaction score. These are the things that they hit thresholds, you turn them green, otherwise yellow, red. Why is this key? Because we have our own KPIs, and then the business is over here with their KPIs, and a lot of times we don't crosswalk them. We don't trace them, and we don't co-own them. So I'm going to challenge everybody here as you're going to your stakeholders and you're saying, hey, look, I looked at your app, I found these vulnerabilities, bam, here you go. Do you know what their perspective is and what their KPIs are? What are they trying to achieve? What did you just look at? Are you about to blow up those KPIs? You're going to get a lot of resistance. Do they have wiggle room to address them? Less resistance, right? Do something called MAW, mutually assured winning. If you understand their KPIs and they understand your KPIs, you jointly then can build a plan that's going to get you towards a more secure organization. Next step on the journey of your business lingo is budgeting and finance performance. Sorry, I just fell asleep just saying that. That's so boring. But it's actually really, really critical for what you do. The first thing is, when does the business set their budget? Because guess what? All that tech debt, all that legacy findings they need to fix has got to be paid for. It's got to be. So if you catch them after their budget cycle, guess what? They don't have funding for it. They then have to remove functionality, right? Or they then have to go back to their executive leadership or higher up to wrangle money to go fix things. That is not a good position for them to be in. So do you have a seat at the table? Are you meeting with them? Do you understand? Do you understand the cycle? Are you having those conversations? Why is that important for security? Because you can reduce that friction in the interaction, right? Really key. The other thing to know, so you've got your budget cycle, you've got your financial performance. How's a company doing? Are we healthy right now? If we are, everybody's a little bit more free with their budget. Everybody's a little bit more okay when security issues show up and you got to either hire an extra developer to help to clear out some backlog. But if it's not, you're going to have a tense interaction potentially with somebody when you show up and you drop those 40,000 vulnerabilities, or even 5 or 6, because they just don't have the cycles. They're trying to meet their KPIs. Is at the end of a quarter where they really have to deliver, and you show up on the second day from the end of the quarter with something that's going to blow up their delivery. Not a fun thing. So if you're aware of that, this helps you speak business language, reduces that friction. Next up are the business cycles themselves. So when is the high season for your business? That is not a great time to start a brand new hygiene initiative that you want to kick off right in the middle of high season. So think about the winter holiday season if you're an e-commerce provider. Think about Singles Day. Anybody here Singles Day? You know what that is? Right? So Singles Day is in Asia. It's meant to celebrate those who aren't in relationships, and you can pamper yourself and go buy yourself stuff to make you feel better. Feels like it's an antidote to some therapy that a lot of people have had. But you can go buy away your troubles. That's one of the biggest shopping days on the planet. And it's 11/11. So if you show up end of October, we just decided to run our scan and we found some criticals, so you need to fix it now. Now, is that important? Absolutely. Like, oh shoot, you found criticals. we got to fix it, and we ought to fix it before everybody's on the platform on 11/11. But could you have done that smarter in the middle of the summer, maybe when things were a little bit of a low, not right before that big day? So understanding business cycles are key. Low season is when you can strike when the iron's hot. Low season, when people are not slammed, is the time that you can show up and say, hey, I've got this hygiene and effort. Hey, I need you to adopt a new kind of scanning in your pipelines. We're going to help you, but you've got some room, right? When this business cycles are happening. Also, when is strategic planning happening? So that usually preempts budgeting, right? So budgeting is you're putting numbers in the spreadsheet. Those numbers align, work your way back to what is our strategy for our function, for each product, for each service, whatever your company delivers. That is when you can pop in for the sweet spot to have that conversation about where are you going strategically, how can security affect that, how can we partner up? And then if you need some budget, that's the time you could maybe layer that into the conversation, identifying some business value and get that plugged in. Okay, third step of the journey now is how you bring yourself forward. It's through empathy, active listening, and influence. So we'll talk about that for just a little bit. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Again, gosh, I mentioned budgeting and finance. Now I'm talking about feelings. Sean, what are you doing? I'm at a security conference. You're killing me, right? But exactly. Thank you. So you're seeing things from another person's perspective. What this does is it helps you walk in the shoes of the people you're talking to. You're going to be able to influence them. Active listening. This isn't just a security thing. This is just like a great tip for not just work, but for life. A lot of times we're listening with the intent to respond. We miss a lot. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, influence itself, which is, the ability to affect thoughts, behaviors, and decisions of others without coercion. And we'll talk about positional authority and some things related to influence that can be a little bit of an impact. So that first element, empathy. I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. She has a great book, Dare to Lead, and she talks about leading with vulnerability. But she has a bunch of content on empathy. So this quote really resonated. Empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment. Here we go again. Emotionally connecting and communicating that incredibly healing message of you're not alone. So that's pretty powerful. She has a great little couple of minute snippet at the end of the session. If there's time, I can get good audio through here. I can play it for you. It's about 3 minutes where she really shows this difference between empathy and sympathy. Why is that important? When we're talking to dev teams, a lot of times security practitioners, we're emotional, actually, invested in what we're finding. Hey, we found a security flaw. Hey, you're using an outdated version of TLS. Hey, you're not doing Alt-C right. We get fired up and we don't care what's happening on the other side. We just think, fix it. We don't empathize and understand what does that look like to the development team that has to respond. How many other pressures do they have from their product manager, from executives, from their customers? We're just one of many, many stakeholders. Legal, privacy. We're just one. We're not the most important. We like to think we are. We aren't the most important. Now, again, it depends on your line of business. In some lines of business where lives really depend on that security, you bet, right? But there's other places where there's a lot of competing pressures. Understanding that is key. And that difference between empathy and sympathy is like, oh, man, really sucks to be you. I'll see you later. Good luck with that, right? That's sympathy. Empathy is like, wow, I really understand this. And if you don't understand it in the context of software delivery or process delivery or within business, you have this within your own life. There have been times where you have been, up to here with personal commitments and stresses. Something's going on. Somebody shows up with that next thing. It feels really good when somebody understands what you're going through. I'll give you a quick aside. My father's getting on in age, and he's not doing so hot, and it took him to a hospital for a test. When I showed up, they had no record of the test. Insurance had canceled it the night before. And to get him there is a big effort and really difficult for him. And so as I sat there thinking, here I go, I'm going to get the healthcare response, which is we don't know, we don't care. There's like 6 other people, get out of our face. This woman spent a half hour hunting it down, getting multiple people on the phone, figuring out what happened. She empathized and said, I looked over at your dad and you, and I understood what was happening. That is what the power of empathy and what we can do in terms of interacting with our stakeholders. Okay, there's a few types of empathy. Just to understand it a little bit, there's cognitive empathy where you say, hey, I understand how you're thinking and feeling. Like I intellectually am understanding it, trying to get in your head. There's one, and I think it's generally difficult, for security practitioners, we tend to slip on the side more of left-brained, data-brained, not as many right-brained folks. So when you're talking about really connecting on an emotional level, like I'm feeling what you're feeling, it's a little bit trickier, but that's another one. And then compassionate empathy is not only do I know that you've got this situation and I'm feeling it, but I do something about it, right? So oftentimes when I'm talking to a development team and I bring some of the findings to them and I can see they hang their head, I can see they're churning through, how on earth am I going to do this? How am I going to explain it to people? They think I'm going to get really hit hard about how did it get in there in the first place? You can see the wheels going. You walk up and you just look them in the eye and say, hey, I'm going to help you. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to get you there, okay? Those kinds of things, like little statements like that go a really long way. All right, in our perspective, coming back to the way security thinks versus dev team, the security team comes in, don't they understand what they're exposing us to? Why don't they get it? Why aren't they fixing it now? But the dev team is saying, don't they understand how hard it is to build and to get something out the door and under the time constraints we have? It's pretty brutal. Let's meet in the middle. That's where the empathy piece comes in. Active listening. I talked about this concept of being present. We're really distractible. I actually have a rule in my house now. I came up with a code word with my daughter because she was getting frustrated. She was the only one in the house who didn't have a phone. And I was Pavlovian conditioned. Something came in from work and I'm going, she was talking to me, and I don't know how everybody operates. I can completely zone out. So she was talking, and then all of a sudden, I remember some and I'm going, and I'm not hearing her. So we came up with a code word, and if she says the word moose, I put my phone down like mid-type unless it's an emergency, and that helped me return to being present. And then eventually, when I came home, I put the phone away for a period of time, so there was no temptation. But that level of presence is really key. This is part of the notion of active listening. From Stephen Covey, one of my favorite sort of self-help authors in the 7 Habits, one of them was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think the then part is really key. Seek first to understand, then, after you've understood. So ask probing questions. You may not understand it yet. Don't respond yet. Having an intense focus on what that speaker is saying to you and listening to the words and the body language. I mentioned the dev manager or the architect who hangs their head thinking, oh my gosh, I cut my own encryption and now they're killing me and I'm gonna have to go replace it. You can see that visibly, right? Let the speaker finish. Now this is really tricky, and I've actually noticed myself backsliding on this with the intensity of requests that I'm getting from around the league. If I know where that person's going and I know what the next 3 or 4 sentences are, and I started to jump in. I pulled that back because I'm like, need to let you finish out and then we'll get to the next place. But it also puts the other person on defense. They don't feel like they're heard. You can't build that relationship. Okay, then after active listening, how do you respond? And there's a couple of phrases that you can use that really kind of tuck into more of what's happening. So you're given the surface level, and instead of saying, oh, I completely got it, probe some more. This is just a consultative approach. Again, not a security thing, but hey, can you tell me more about, right? Sure, I will, here you go. Or help me better understand. And I really like that one because that puts you in that vulnerable position. Hey, what you said, I didn't understand. That's on me. Can you help me, right? It gives them power. And they, sure, I'm gonna help you. Let me give you some more of that information that you need. A lot of the information that I in particular need to understand how to prioritize the security work is to understand what is the real business impact. of them doing or not doing it. For instance, if this is the equivalent of a $20,000 risk and the business has a $400,000 opportunity on the table, do I want to force that particular conversation? To an extent I do. I got to look at policies and some other things, but that's not the smartest business decision. If this is a high likelihood of a potential breach because it's a pretty significant vulnerability with easy exploitability, and you look at the average cost of a breach, let's call it around 3.5 million, and you take about, say, 10% likelihood, and it's probably more than that, that's a $300,000 cost. So $300,000 impact to the business for, say, a $100,000 business opportunity. Now I can do apples to apples comparison and have a good conversation there. I can do that because I'm gathering more context from the business that I didn't have before. I didn't understand what the value of the work was going to be. Frank, you had a question?
What if that app doesn't generate any money at all, and the pushback from the business is, hey, this app is supporting just my dad in his work, I don't even know how much it generated. We used to get a lot of that pushback.
Right. Let me see if I can recap that question here. So the question was, hey, what if the app itself doesn't generate revenue, but it's supporting some other efforts, supporting a dev, that kind of a thing, and how do you contextualize that? I think, if you're supporting the business is doing something, you can sort of connect the dots to how much value a developer will be generating, what the impact is in productivity. Go back to your KPIs, what are you supposed to be delivering, and then you can kind of say, okay, let's figure that out. But it does get harder. It's much easier if somebody has, I got a $3 million market opportunity, and you're coming up with an informational from a scanning tool, right? Like, it just doesn't foot. All right, next one is influence. And this is really important. If you're the Department of No, your influence really, really, really shrinks. So that concept of yes and helps build out your influence. That sets the stage for the next relationship, the next interaction, the next situation that you have to deal with will go smoother and have less friction because you're leveraging that influence well. You have two kinds of influence, positional and personal. The positional influence is something security folks like to wield. Early in my security career, there's a gentleman I work with, and he felt like his reason for being, why the company hired him, was to protect the CISO. So he ran around, and there were just bodies laying everywhere because he thought he was doing the right thing, protecting the CISO. He was using his position saying, I'm security, here's the policy, do it, right? And it was not the right culture for that kind of, I'm going to leverage my position as security. That's what a lot of people in organizations don't like about security teams. You show up and say, hey, I got my badge, I'm the police, and you embrace it. Rather, use your personal influence. It comes from the character that you bring, the interest truly in what the company is doing as a whole. It's not just security, that's also the business objectives, right? It's everybody's objective. It's the culture of the company. What is the culture? If the culture is not a police state and you come in guns a-blazing, it's not gonna work. This drives collaboration and teamwork and helps you build trust. So when you have one of those down cycles in the season, remember, you have up cycles when people are really slammed, and then those periods where there's room, they're more willing to jump in and do your hygiene effort, right? You've built that relationship and that trust. Let me pause for a second. Any other questions or thoughts so far? I know about halfway through, yeah?
So drawing back to the empathy section, is there anything that you could identify as a good situation to use sympathy over empathy?
That's a really good question. Okay, here's the question. It says, when talking about empathy, are there any times when it's better, when there's a situation better to use sympathy than empathy? I would probably say if you are not empathetic and you have, like really, there's some people who can't feel that way, but they could maybe pull the sympathy card. That's better than, nothing in that moment of having somebody who's emotional or vulnerable on the other side. So probably in that case, I think many cases where you can say, and I think that video is going to be really helpful also to understand that difference. But if you can just figure out a way to connect to that human that empathy is going to be the better card than sympathy. Do you have any thoughts on when sympathy might be a better play?
Say, for an example, somebody identified a security vulnerability and they're completely panicking. So their initial response emotionally is panic. So if you are to empathize, you are also not panicking.
Empathy doesn't mean reflecting,
Okay.
right? So I empathize by thinking back to when I had panic, and what did I need from somebody in order to reduce my levels of panic? So reassurance, right? So that would be empathizing, knowing what you're feeling. Some people will take that and be like, oh, calm down, just, right? You get a little annoyed, no, just, I understand this is really rough. Like I've been in incidents where literally the CIO walked up and she said, I'm trying to know whether or not I need a box to pack my things. I'm like, take a deep breath. We're trying to figure everything out. Don't pack the box yet. I'm going to help you. I'm doing everything I can to figure out. Here's what we know. Does that make you feel better? Yep. Okay, cool. I'm going to go back to, figuring out what's going on. That moment. So that hopefully that distinction helps.
You even use yes and in that situation.
Yes and?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, get your box ready, and you don't need it yet. All right, let's see. So, building that trust and credibility in communications, be clear. More words in security is not better. It's just a lot of jargon. If you can figure out how to say it simply, and actually one of the examples I use, the very end with GenAI and SSRF is going to get to this. It's a little bit silly, but it's going to drive home that point. And again, don't just use your security terms and your acronyms. Make sure that you're contextually aware of the business and maybe use some of their language, their KPIs, the way they talk about their product. Leverage relationships. Those relationships are key. So that dev manager, I still popped into his office every time. Every time he said, here come the police, I'm like, oh, Des, come on, man. And we would have this conversation. After a while, he was like, here comes my partner, right? I won. The moment he started doing that, I said, ooh, just hit my microphone. Am I still working? Okay. That was outstanding. Leading by example is really key. So making sure that you're demonstrating the values and behaviors you want to see other people demonstrate with you back to them. And also this is exercising integrity in the moment of choice. You will have some stakeholders who show up and do not treat you with the level of respect or professionalism that you would expect. That's that moment to say, I'm not going to reflect back that level of disrespect. Rather, I'm going to understand a little bit. I'm going to empathize. I'm going to back the situation down, and I'm going to maintain my value center. It's really important. Security can get pretty heated. So absorbing the emotions from the person across from you and reflecting it back can easily become a very quick escalation, which not only reduces your credibility, but you are an emissary, an ambassador to the rest of the security function. So 20 people could have amazing interactions that day. You have that bad interaction. Security was a bad team that day as a whole. So you got to remember that you're representing everybody and adjust your approach based on situation and individuals. Some people are stressed about security. Some people understand. Yeah.
I have an input for don't just be clear in your security terms. Now, I work for Arca Cloud. So what we sort of do is when you're opening security finding tickets, like vulnerability tickets, what we sort of do is rather than capturing the actual vulnerability, or information like SSR and things like that, or least privilege, we started incorporating the actual risk in the Jira description set. That significantly made more clear for everyone, right? Because if you're an executive, you just don't read the summary. If you are a manager, you don't read the summary. And then that helped to understand why we need to fix it, rather than saying that, oh, this application or this endpoint has SSR. And then going into the details doesn't really help. Rather than doing that, just providing because of this could happen, and the impact, that is what the key is. That is what would help you out to make or push developers to fix it, rather than providing the security terms or jargons, which is not helping the developers.
That's great. Not sure if everybody heard that, but basically the comment was, hey, other than just putting in the details of the security finding itself, at his current company, they ended up putting in the sort of business articulated risk statement and what the impacts could be so that somebody could digest it, not be just reading the security terms. Is that accurate? And that's had a big impact. Have you gotten feedback from customers? Awesome. Okay, so guess what? GenAI can indeed help. You are not alone. A lot of this stuff is language. Now we have large language models, and now we can figure out, as we try to empathize or write up a vulnerability, we can maybe use some of those models, obviously use your company's AI policy and take that into account, but if you do it generic enough, it's just a description of a vulnerability, a flaw, a security concept from the perspective of somebody else. So you might look across from you, and I'll give you an example of talking to your grandmother, okay? You may not know how to start explaining something about what you do at work to your grandmother. But now you don't have to sit there and rack your brain to put yourself in her position and think, what does she know about security and computers and the world right now? And instead, you can ask GenAI, ChatGPT, to figure it out for you and explain that concept. And then you can internalize it and offer it back. You don't have to have that skill anymore. So as I was mentioning earlier, I'm not saying that you shouldn't work on it, but I'm saying that now you can outsource some of that to some of these tools. So I want to give a little bit of an example here, focused around the SSRF and SSRF vulnerability. So, and this is going to make sense. Robots, flowers, and SSRF, I promise, will make sense in just a little bit. But let's say it's been a juicy bug bounty day. If you have a bug bounty program, and one of your bug bounty hunters found an SSRF in your product, and you go to the product team, and the architect and tech lead are on vacation, so they give you the product manager, who may or may not be as technical as some of the folks that you were working with. And so you walk in, and I want to read this one out because this is how you might present it to your product manager. Listen, we found SSRF. It allows an attacker to induce a server-side application to make HTTP requests, arbitrary internal and external resources. You can craft a request such as manipulated GET, and that's what they did. And the attacker can extract sensitive metadata or other internal data that we shouldn't disclose. So we really need to fix that. And you look over at the product manager, and what just happened? I don't have my tech lead. Sounds like something bad just happened. Words. Yikes, right? So before you find out you're going to be working with that product manager, and before you go to that meeting, you leverage ChatGPT, and this is literally the prompt. I asked some things about SSRF, and then I said I need to explain it to a product manager who is missing their technical team. Explain it to that product manager, and as if you were explaining it to my 78-year-old grandma. So say, okay, let's say your project involves a helpful robot that runs errands for grandma, and she instructs the robot to go to the store and buy her favorite flowers. However, someone tricks the robot into going to a hidden room in the house where there's a safe containing grandma's important documents that happen to be open. That would be really bad. So this scenario is similar to a vulnerability we call SSRF, like your bug bounty hacker found. A website can be misled into making requests to places it just shouldn't access, like that hidden room with the safe. If successful, this could allow the attacker to gain access to sensitive information or internal systems, just like for your grandma. Now, I read it in a sort of slightly snarky tone, right? I mean, but you can figure out how to make the security language accessible for the stakeholder. And all you have to do, that's a very left brain thing. Input, what is stakeholder? Product manager. Boolean, technical or not? Not, right? A couple of other things. Build a prompt, get the way to explain your security situation to that stakeholder with success. And that stakeholder goes from being incredibly stressed to, and then you use your empathy and your relationship building and say, look, hey, I'm gonna help you out. There's another tech resource on another product team who's dealt with SSRF before. Let me see if I can connect you guys. Maybe they can help out while you're trying to figure out how to respond to this, right? Ways that you can make security a partner and part of the yes and versus the Department of no. Frank?
Wouldn't that reduce your gravitas with stakeholder? Like, if you try to dumb it down too much, then they not take you seriously.
Okay, so that question is, wouldn't that reduce your gravitas with your stakeholders if you dumb it down too much and then they won't take you seriously? Absolutely, it's a balance, right? So if you can't be, and I use the word snarky, it was more like condescending. You don't want it to be like a condescending or, you don't want to be talking down to the person. You want to meet them where they're at. You might miss a few times, but again, in that interest of being, honest and transparent, you can say, hey, I'm going to try to explain this in a little different way. If you want me to get more technical, I can. If you need me to bring it, a little bit more accessible, I can. Let's work together to explain it. So there's words that you can use to contextualize. You don't always want to talk that way. So, if you're talking to an incredibly technical architect, you would not want to do the grandma scenario. You just jump right in with SSRF and they're probably off already fixing it, right? So it does depend on the context. All right, so now by going through the context around yes and following the understanding of the way your business operates in those areas of business context around culture, around all the other things that we talked about, plus the 3 things that you can put in your toolkit, empathy, active listening, and influence, you now pivot to the department of yes and. You're no longer the department of no. When you show up in someone's virtual office now, I don't know how many people are back in the office. Is there most people still working remotely? Yeah. So, in your virtual office, but you're dealing with somebody and you hit them on Slack and say, hey, I got a minute. They don't go, oh my gosh, here comes security, right? They say, yeah, what's going on? How can I help, right? And you say, hey, let's talk. So that is the end of the talk. Are there any other questions? Yes?
With so many people working from home, I feel like it's easier to build empathy with people when you're in the room with them and you can read their body language and you can hear the inflections in their voice. So how do you reach out in different ways to continue building those relationships from home?
Wow, that's fantastic. And that's like totally, now I'll riff and I'll depend on everybody from the room as well. There are a few things that you can do. It takes energy and investment. And again, this is, as security pros, we're not sitting around twiddling our thumbs all day. We're really, really busy. But one of the things that I really like to do, and I define this as success with my product security teams in particular, is when the dev teams include them in their celebrations at launch. So, and if any of those engineers don't attend that celebration, I'm furious, because it's such an amazing opportunity to build relationship, to do the collaborative high five, to set the stage for the next release. So any opportunity that comes to socialize that way, to attend a few of their stand-ups, just to build those relationships. The next thing is, if there are people in your geography, so I was coming to LASCON, I found a couple of people from Texas who were on my team. I said, come to LASCON, and by the way, let's have some meetings and let's break some bread and have some drinks and have a good time, and hopefully that will build some additional relationships. But you have to seek those things out. There was also, and I'm looking over here at Bonnie, who was with me at a former company, but one of the folks did some research about, hey, how do we handle the work from home situation? And a lot of people find, or the research shows, that your stress levels are raised when you're on screen and looking at people who are on screen for long amounts of time, that the guidance is actually to turn your screen off for a good chunk of the day so that you're not staring at boxes and people moving. It actually raises stress hormones. But that makes it trickier because now you can't see the person at all. And I've had some one-on-ones where literally I think the person forgot that their camera wasn't off, so 20 minutes in I'm just like, just want to let you know. And they go, oh, I had no idea, right? So you got to have those conversations and build those relationships. The body language is key. You can hear, if your ear is attuned, by the way, inflections in voice. And that's, I'm asking for way more. I also happen to be a musician, I think, and a lot of technologists are also musicians. How many musicians do we have in the room? Show of hands. All right, about a quarter. You can hear the intonation and the tonality in the voice change. A quiver that shows somebody's nervous. somebody who was speaking at a voice like this, suddenly speaking at a voice like this, because maybe they're not sure, But those are very, very subtle cues, and it's really hard. But trying to build social moments, so if it's within your team, not with your stakeholders may not be as willing to do something like this. Sorry, let me step back. When I mentioned corporate culture, attending critical to attend the company all hands, also a lot of companies now are doing virtual coffee, virtual gaming, where people come together and they just take an hour or so to socialize. Highly recommend as security folks to attend those. A lot of times people won't. I had a code review guy who I walked up and I said, hey, I really want you to go to the company meeting. Come with me. He's like, hey, I'm looking through the code. I'll meet you guys. And the whole team was there. I'm like, no, why don't you come as part of a member of the team? And 2, 3, 4 times asking him, took his hands off the keyboard. He looked up at me and he said, if you are going to make me go to that meeting, I will go, but I would rather be in my, and I realized at that point, he didn't want to play and he was hunting something down. I said, no problem. So you also have to, read that language and figure out, what subset you get together. But these are amazing opportunities when they show up, if your company has them, to take advantage of them. And you can lead some yourself. And if the security team puts them together and people show up and they realize we're not going to be ambushing them with vulnerabilities and issues, but we're just having a conversation, we're doing a Kahoot, we're making cookies online, which is something that we do now. That's something that can help build that relationship. But it's harder. You got to seek out those opportunities. Anybody else have experiences from their companies or other thoughts on how you can build that relationship in a remote world with your stakeholders?
And I think that at the end of it, if you don't see them, if you don't hear them, you can't imagine what they have in mind. It's just the scenarios are not that far from what you experience, from what other experience. So you can empathize with how you would think they feel. Worst case, you got it wrong.
Right. Yeah, and I've used a metaphor that's probably not overly polite, but it's calling someone's baby ugly. It's kind of what security does. And that doesn't feel good, right? So you figure if you flip the script and somebody came to you and said, hey, that desk that you built, that's a disaster, right? They used the wrong screws, there's a problem, that color is terrible. You're gonna feel bad. They're gonna feel bad when you show up with a security finding, unless you can say, hey, and it's really hard to build a desk that way, and here's some suggestions that I have, and I'm happy to help you. Obviously, if you call the desk ugly, it's a different thing. But if you say it in a more polite way, you can help them out. That's good feedback. Frank?
One thing that really works is, like on your point, empathy. Sitting down with them and sprint planning, for example. So it's easy to just hey, there's a bunch of critical code, can you fix it for next week? But sitting down with sprint planning and saying, hey, if we look at these 3 that are consistently or that are similar, can we just schedule it for next sprint? And it's by story point. You talk their language, they are much more accepting. Of course, you can't do that every sprint because security champion can't spread, but at least you show empathy on how they think and how they are busy, not just saying, hey, can you do this by this day?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I don't know if everybody heard, but Frank was just saying if you align with their sprint planning approach and you can layer in the work in a more pragmatic way, then you can get the work done and it's not as stressful. You can't always do it like that, but when you can, take advantage of that opportunity. I think somebody, did you have your hand up or?
I thought it was a great point. I was just going to sort of follow up on it with the point that I had a similar situation where asking engineers for contributions to leadership stuff, and showing up at the sprint planning was super helpful. Not just because it was another avenue and a place to communicate, but also because I was hearing back from them what it was that they were busy with, and so sort of able to temper the requests that so they fit in better with the work that was going on.
Yeah, that's great. And what a great example, right? If you look at the sprint that's upcoming and you see a story and they're going to be opening that particular module of code, and while they're in there, that fix isn't too hard, you can say, hey, let's pull this off the backlog, combine them. Yeah, now you're providing value, making it easier. It's a great point.
The challenge in that, though, is the amount of story point and the amount of hey, I need to deliver the $1 million contract, I need these things delivered. So if it's not important for your boss, it's never going to be important for you, regardless if you're in there. So being in the sprint, but also aligning those things that you ask with the OKR that they are supposed to have, or in general say, hey, these five critical and they have an objective on critical, needs to go in there for next month. Maybe we can combine, maybe we can focus on the single file that you're going to work on, the single piece of code of report, and so on, or the same trend of library. That will help, and that gets credit because you talk their language, it's in their objective, and you're not going to get them in trouble.
And here's if we harken back to the keynote from Tanya, and I'm putting Bonnie on the spot again, but you keep going. But tomorrow she's doing a presentation on champion programs. You also, if you have a champion, you have an ambassador in the dev team who is a developer, but who thinks destructively, understands security. They can weigh in on that story, and it's a little bit more palatable when they're weighing in and saying, hey, let's add this in the next sprint, than when you're doing it as a security practitioner. So by having that one hop with the champion, you can really get some good stuff done.
Yeah, I mean, I have a different perspective. These are valid points. In order to make those points work, you need to understand the culture of the team and the company. Unless you understand the culture, it's very hard. You can go and sit in the sprint planning, they're going to push back, hey, we have only this much amount of resources, we can't do it. So one good thing is, security champion is a good thing. Someone can watch for you. Smaller companies, when I was working for smaller companies, what I figured out was, yes, I can go and sit in the sprint planning, I can do it. But bigger companies, number of projects, it's very, very hard. So you would have to tackle in such a way that understand what exactly is going on the site. I recently learned from my wife, because she works for management, so she overheard what I was talking to a developer, where we were discussing about a vulnerability where they said they fixed it, but they did not. So it was not an argument, I would say. It was more on I was not able to listen to them, right? I was just, then after the meeting, it was, they're okay, they will go then fix it. I was pretty confident on that. But when I came out of the meeting, she told me that you didn't even allow them to talk for what their actual problem is. If you have listened to them for 10 minutes, they would have fixed the problem, they would have been very happy. That literally changed my perspective. Now, I don't like when they come in and when they speak about it, sometimes they just blast. Oh, you guys came at the last minute, you should have found this earlier, why didn't you do it last time? Oh, previous engineer didn't find it, all those ones. So listen to all of them. At the end of the day, when you start talking, that really gets into their.
This is great. So if you look at the presentation, journey step 2 was understanding the corporate culture. Step 3, number 2, was active listening. So you just, thank you. I didn't pay him to be in the audience, by the way. Thank you.
Like, if it's not important for your boss, if it's not in your metric, like the spike blast, you will not get to that point. You will not get and schedule those things. So. And that goes back to your great point on the culture. Like, if you build a culture of like, hey, every sprint you dedicate 2 story point, 3 story point to security, then you get the allowance, and then you can automate and cascade that thing. You don't need to be in every sprint meeting because it's impossible.
Yeah, hold on. I think I could take one more question or comment, and then we can do it and spill over.
You left way before we did this, but we actually, if you guys come to talk tomorrow, we were able to implement a security champion within all of our sprints and slides, and so we have that built in now.
Awesome. Show everybody how to do it. Tomorrow at what time? What time's the talk tomorrow?
Oh, 11:30.
11:30. Learn how to inject everybody into your sprints, get security champion program stood up and thriving. Well, hey, thanks everybody for attending the talk and appreciate the spirited dialogue and questions.